Hello, everybody. It is John Pollock live from the BDE with Eric Marcotte. Eric, this has been the most challenging show I have ever had to logistically put together. Thank you so much for joining me.
I mean, I had to adjust very little for myself. You're the one who is traveling to other parts of the city to get this show done.
So let me just get all of this off my chest. On, I believe it was Wednesday, I get home and there's a notice in my mail that on Sunday, the power for my entire street is going to be down beginning at 8 a.m. well into the afternoon of about 3 p.m. And instantly, my number one priority, this UFC show that we have to do on Sunday, just a total mess. So thankfully, Davey Portman coming through in the clutch, hears about my dilemma, offers up the BDE itself for me. And thus I have arrived. I have overcome travel issues, microphone issues. If you're getting some ambient noise in the background, that is the beautiful Don Valley Parkway. And you know what, folks? That just comes with the territory. That's what you've got. Eric Marcotte here to steer the ship. How does it look? How does it sound? Just lie, Eric. Say that it sounds flawless.
It sounds flawless, and really the background just adds to it. There's so much going on. Kairi Zane is now featured in this UFC.
What are we
recap.
doing? Like, what are we doing at this point? This is just surreal for me. But we are here to chat about UFC 281 that went down on Saturday night from Madison Square Garden. I think, Eric, I mean, recency bias aside, I thought this was probably the card of the year. I thought this was just a fantastic show, pretty much from top to bottom. We had 14 fights. I believe 11 finishes of the 14. You correct me if I'm wrong.
You got it. 14 fights, 11 finishes. And I'm with you. I thought this was the card of the year. Just tremendous stuff from the first fight on the prelim onwards.
So the main takeaways from the show, there were quite a lot of them. 22,845 was the announced sellout crowd at Madison Square Garden, a gate of $11,562,807. Not for the cheap at heart to be attending the show at MSG, but we have two new champions, including Alex Pereira, who is the new middleweight champion, who has now earned his third combat sports victory over Israel Adesanya, ending his 3-year championship reign. A main event that I found, extremely compelling, Eric, because this was a fight that I think everybody to a person had the same scorecard going into that 5th round. And it seemed to be that Adesanya had done enough figuring out Pereira, but everyone knew the danger that this guy presented. And Adesanya found himself in the most dangerous position up against the fence and being finished in this 5th round.
Yeah, every exchange throughout this fight was so tense. I mean, Pereira, he clearly had the advantage in terms of power, but early in the first round, or at the end of the first round, you saw Adesanya rock Pereira, and that kind of brings it both ways, where throughout the entire fight, you're thinking, well, Adesanya can tag him at any moment of this fight and end it. And throughout the fight, he does seem to be a step ahead, but Pereira is constantly finding success whenever he marches forward, trapping Adesanya against the cage. And it feels like he's getting closer and closer to landing that big shot, until we finally get to the final round where he is down on the scorecards in need of a finish, and he is just pressuring forward nonstop, giving Adesanya no room, and he tags him.
So the fight began, first of all, so both men weigh in on Friday, and Pereira waited pretty much literally until the last minute to weigh in. It looked like he had a hell of a weight cut to get down to 185. And by the time they stepped into the cage, I believe the stat out there was that Pereira, who weighed in at 184.6 pounds, was up to 211 pounds. Dude, he looked like a monster next to Adesanya. They brought it up that he looked like a light heavyweight. There was no exaggeration with that point. It looked like a monster next to Adesanya.
The size difference almost seemed bigger here than it did in Adesanya's fight at light heavyweight against Jan Blachowicz. Yeah. That's how big Pereira is. He is a ginormous middleweight.
Does this somewhat cool your thoughts on the Adesanya move, the permanent move to light heavyweight? Because I've now seen 2 fights where he has taken on larger individuals. Certainly this guy could take some time off and put on muscle, add some size, but This guy's a middleweight to me. I think this is his weight class. I don't know about the move up to light heavyweight on a permanent basis.
I agree. I think he has the perfect size for middleweight. That being said, I think the light heavyweight division is honestly weak enough that even with his size disadvantage, he can beat a lot of those fighters. But he is a middleweight. This is his weight class. I don't know if I can say the same about the current middleweight champion, but he's yet to miss weight, I suppose.
So in the first round, I mean, this was a round, again, the huge size disparity, and Adesanya landed with a right hand, but then it's Pereira that was clinching with him, delivering body shots. And I think most had Pereira winning this round up until the final second of this round, where Adesanya stuns him with a right hand and then throws this left hook that was, I think, right up against the line of allowable. I mean, they explained that he wound up as the horn was sounding and then connected after the horn, gets in this left hook at the end. But that was enough that I think it changed everyone's scorecard if you were leaning towards Pereira, and I gave Adesanya the first round.
Definitely. He had Pereira in a ton of trouble here, to the extent that you could see that if there was more time left in the round, he may have got the quick finish. But I didn't think the shot after the bell was too egregious. It was like real quick. This wasn't like a Jermaine Durand, Amin Holly Holm, or Jose Aldo, Chad Mendes type strike, but a huge moment for Adesanya early in the bout.
Pereira comes back in the second round. He's landing with jabs. Adesanya on the break connected with a big shot, but it's Pereira with the pressure, putting Adesanya against the fence. And this is where he had his best success, was in close, backing up Adesanya towards the fence, and then gets a takedown at the end of the round on Adesanya. So a Pereira round in the second. And then the third round, very big one for Adesanya, because suddenly, as they were calling him, NCAA Adesanya comes out, and it is the wrestling game of Adesanya, who takes him down, wrist control, getting his hooks in, and then Pereira tries to roll for a leg lock unsuccessfully, and Adesanya's on top in his guard, and then stands up, goes for an axe kick to the body. Huge round for Adesanya, and we've got it. I assume, Eric, the same card of 2-1 going into round number 4.
Yes, definitely.
Surprised at all that Adesanya went the wrestling route in this round. Like, to me, it was a big statement that this was not about ego for this guy of having to get the knockout. This was a very strategic round and a super effective one for Adesanya.
No, I actually expected a lot more grappling from Adesanya throughout this fight. You know, he's not a wrestler. I think they even said this was the first takedown of his MMA career, but his grappling is very impressive. Every time the fights went to the ground, he's either been able to return to his feet immediately, or he's showcased some strong jiu-jitsu. So I thought against a fighter like Pereira, who doesn't have, I mean, every time he's went to the ground, he has not looked good at all. I thought Adesanya might try to beat him there, and the third round was the most we saw of. He was unsuccessful with his other attempts to engage Pereira in the grappling departments, but a strong round for Adesanya.
The fourth round, it seemed very strategic on both sides, that I think both knew that they wanted to keep enough in the tank for a fifth round. But this was another Adesanya round. He's attacking with kicks all over, landing some really effective kicks to the body of Pereira. And then Pereira puts Adesanya against the fence, lands a big shot, and then they clinch. Another big strike by Pereira at the end. A bit closer, but I thought still an Adesanya round. So he is up, I would say, on most scorecards, 3-1 going into this fifth and final round. And they start off the round clinching, and the crowd is booing this. They just want to see these guys go to town. And Adesanya checks a leg kick, and he rolls backward. And then it is Pereira putting him towards the fence, and he starts this barrage with a right hook. And then he mixes in an uppercut, and then a left hook, and then the uppercuts are flowing, and Pereira just unloads everything, and Adesanya is just eating these and looks out on his feet. He is keeling over. He's on rubbery legs, and Kevin McDonald steps in, stopping the fight after this huge flurry at 2 minutes, 1 second of round number 5. Your new middleweight champion, Alex Pereira. A hell of a performance by Pereira. I think he answered a lot of questions. At the same time, this is not this unbeatable monster either at middleweight. I think you could, if you are a top-tier middleweight, if you are Adesanya, there is a path to victory against this guy, but he is extremely dangerous in certain situations, and being able to put Adesanya, his back up against the cage, limiting where he could go. That proved to be a very, very dangerous scenario for Adesanya and ultimately ended the fight.
The leg kicks from Pereira added up throughout the bout, and they really affected Adesanya's movement, allowing him to close the distance and trap Adesanya against the cage, especially later in the fight where, after the third round, I was worried about Pereira's gas tank. I thought it looked like he was going to be slowing down, but he didn't really, especially in round 5. He seemed to have more left in him than Adesanya did, who was fighting very defensively at that point. It was
I think some of that was that fourth round. I think he realized in the fourth of kind of preserving himself for that fifth. Like it was a smart game plan that he had, a risky one, but I kept going back in the fifth round, Eric, that there's always the debate about open scoring and this idea that, and granted, you will get different variations, but the fear is that, well, if someone knows they're up, they're just going to coast at the end. This to me was like the most clear cut scorecard, and Adesanya had every excuse in the world to just coast in the fifth. And the opposite argument is that the guy who knows he's down is going to be so aggressive. And I think everyone in the world knew that Adesanya just had to get through these 5 minutes and he was winning this decision. And instead we got this finish in the fifth. And I think that it was, to me, it was more intriguing because I don't think there was any debate about the 4 rounds going into this, unless you were, I don't know, just like really on a different island when it came to this scoring. I thought the 4 rounds were pretty clear cut.
So did I. I didn't think there was any controversy at all, and neither did the corners of either fighter. I think Adesanya was well aware that he was up going into that final round, and Pereira's corner, they told him he needed a finish to win the fight, and he's like, in the most stoic, calm way possible, like, yeah, okay, I'm going to go do that, and he did.
This corner of Pereira's going into the fifth was something to hear. I mean, they were just, pretty much telling them, this is what your life has come to, these next 5 minutes. So you're either going to live or you won't. So it's up to you, essentially, was the message here. And Pereira lived. He is the middleweight champion. And I think that there's going to be a hell of an argument to go to the rematch here. Do you see that being the automatic rematch direction, or could you see something else playing out here for Pereira and Adesanya?
Adesanya was a great champion. I believe this would have been his 6th title defense if he were to have won this fight. So it wouldn't shock me at all if he does get the immediate rematch, even though he's down 3 fights to Pereira now, which is remarkable. But there are other directions to go in, because I bet watching this fight and the outcome, Robert Whittaker was sitting at home, a very, very happy man, because he was effectively eliminated from the title picture after 2 losses to Adesanya, despite beating everyone else in the division. And now he just really has to get by Paulo Costa. And boom, he is a strong wrestler. He has great takedowns. I think he's looking at this fight and he's saying, this is a great matchup for me. What about Marvin Vettori? 2 losses to Adesanya. Same boat. Strong wrestler. He's looking at that as a winnable fight too. The entire division has been shaken up by this result.
Certainly. I think that Whittaker and Vettori are very, very tough styles for Pereira to deal with. Costa, I would favor Pereira against Costa. But to be quite honest, if you announced tomorrow that Adesanya was getting the rematch, I think that there would be a lot of people that would still favor Adesanya in the rematch. Like it's one of those styles. Like Adesanya was, minutes. He was 3 minutes away from a decision victory, but there is going to be there is always that threat with Pereira, and having it certainly questions, if you are Alex Pereira, how much your hunger is to fight this guy for a 4th time when you have 3 victories over 2 sports over this guy. Do you want to go through another preparation for Adesanya?
Yeah, at some point that motivation's not entirely going to be there. You've beaten this man 3 times. Each one was like, none of these he just steamrolled Adesanya. They were all fights that you could argue Adesanya was winning until he didn't. But I wouldn't be shocked. He seems like the kind of guy who's just kind of down for anything too. You just hear his interviews, his reactions. You don't seem to get a lot from him. I can see him just getting that contract. Okay, that's the next fight. Or they'll give him Marvin Vettori, a stylistic nightmare. But yeah, okay, sounds good. He's quite the character, or the exact opposite, maybe.
So how is our post show going so far, Eric? Give us an assessment. Give us a breakdown.
I think given everything that led up to this, I'm giving us like top reviews. This is us working through the Titanic going down. It's remarkable.
I feel I am paying attention to like 5 separate things. One of them being the recap here. So as though the waters might be a little choppy, as long as we are navigating, I'm happy. So thank you to all of you that are joining us or listening live after the fact. But it was not just the end of one historic title reign. It was the end of 2 historic title reigns, Eric, because Zhang Weili is once again the women's strawweight champion, ending the reign of Carla Esparza, which did not get off to the most entertaining start earlier this year when she defeated Rose Namajunas in what might be the worst fight of 2022. I'm going to say this. I was not picking Carla Esparza to win this fight, but the amount of just disregard for Carla Esparza this week, Eric, I thought was just, it was too much for me. I was like, there's no, and granted, in hindsight, everyone can sit on those beliefs and they're not cold takes, but I just felt like the idea that Carla Esparza didn't have a prayer in this fight, I was not on that level. I think Carla Esparza, I was not picking her to win this fight, but I did not think this was just a automatic that she is just a lamb being brought to slaughter here. There was so much disrespect for Carla Esparza in the lead up to this fight.
I may have given her a prayer, but that was about it. The thing is,
I'm all alone here on the Carla Esparza front.
I don't think Carla Esparza is a poor fighter by any means. She's proven herself over the years, but Zhang is just a bit better everywhere, even in the grappling department, as we saw in this fight, because she is so strong and explosive that a person like Esparza with more rigid movements, she had a tough time dealing with that, and she had a tough time dealing with Zhang's pressure, as we'll get to as well.
Yeah, I mean, these were just incredible odds when you look at a championship fight. The challenger, Zhang Weili, a minus 340 favorite. Esparza, the plus 280 underdog. I mean, it's not every day you see those kinds of numbers for a champion and challenger, but you can't really argue either. Zhang was using kicks. Once she started to loosen up in the first round, I mean, you really saw that Esparza, first of all, the woman is not allowed to come out to Metallica. She updated everybody. She's come out to every fight to Metallica, and then she was told the day of no Metallica. So she got to come out to what was this? The Dropkick Murphys off of Dana White's old iPod.
Yeah, the most generic walkout song aside from Rocky music imaginable. Yeah.
Man, it was just like, well, what's your second pick for a theme? Just pick anything. I don't care. All right, you're getting the Dropkick Murphys because that's our default
this
song.
Was straight from the Dana White playlist, right? Like this 100%. Is like one of his top 5 songs on there. She's lucky she didn't come at the stem, honestly.
Yeah, it was going to be Dropkick Murphys, Stem, or Jump Around. Those are your 3 picks from Dana White's collection. So Esparza catches the leg, trying to take her down. They scramble, and Zhang gets her back, and they get back to the feet. Esparza catches the leg again, but Zhang spins around, getting side control. And here you can see the progression of Zhang's grappling and ends the round in Carla's guard, lands an elbow. Zhang wins the first round. And then in the second, it's Zhang defending the takedown. And the way that this scramble ends is Zhang with a crucifix tying up the right arm of Esparza, and then she's got her arm around the neck of Carla, so she's threatening with the choke, and then with her free hand she gets it behind the neck to cinch in the rear naked choke. A minute 5 of round number 2. Zhang Weili, your strawweight champion for a second time. So we had two-time strawweight champions in this fight by the end of it all, and a pretty clear path to victory here for Zhang Weili, as Carla Esparza, probably the last time she will challenge for a championship in her career at the age of 35. That would be my expectation.
I think that's a fair guess as well. I mean, nothing's impossible in the sport, but especially as long as Zhang Weili is champion, I don't see that rematch happening anytime soon.
Maybe if Carla Esparza takes the Renato Moicano strategy for post-fight interviews, might be able to crack one more title fight down the road. But I'll tell you who the unofficial winner of this fight was: Rose Namajunas. There was nobody who had it was either feast or famine based on who won this fight. Carla Esparza wins. Rose Namajunas isn't sniffing a rematch with Esparza, but with Zhang Weili, that to me is the obvious fight after this. So Rose Namajunas had to be very, very happy with this outcome because it was a tale of two outcomes based on whoever left with the championship.
Yeah, and she has 2 wins over Zhang as it is. The second fight was very close. I scored that one for Zhang, but Rose got her arm raised in the end. Obviously, her last fight is a loss and a very one that will not be fondly remembered by the masses. I wouldn't be surprised if she does have one more fight before then, but there aren't a lot of options in terms of star power. I mean, Joanna Jędrzejczyk is effectively retired, and she has 2 losses to Zhang as well if she were to come back. Jessica Andrade, I have no idea what she's up to. I think she's back at flyweight, but a loss to Zhang on her record as well. Amanda Lemos is an option, and I think that would be a very entertaining fight, but she doesn't have the name value. So I do think Namajunas may be the most likely next challenger, depending on her availability.
Yeah, it's also it's always that difficult role for someone like a Carla Esparza, who I still feel is dangerous enough that she can knock off a lot of contenders. But if you kind of see her as on the, like, she is out of that championship picture and you're not all that motivated to see her in a title fight again, I mean, what kind of matches make a whole lot of sense where Esparza can knock off a lot of your potential challengers in a division that isn't too deep with them either? I still see Esparza beating, like, you know, top 10, top 5, even quality opponents, as we saw in the lead up to her title fight, who she could still, you know, like a Yan Xiaonan, like she demonstrated some very effective skills in that fight.
Oh, there's an easy next matchup to make for her. Carla Esparza, Rose Namajunas 3 to determine the next challenger.
How about maybe they can find some kind of stipulation for that fight to spice it up. Maybe Rose Namajunas, Carla Esparza, power slap.
Oh, that's money. That is money right there. I mean, you're guaranteed action in that at the very least, right?
I've wanted to ask you this all week. Will you be watching Power Slap, Eric?
I'll watch the first one. I will say that. I will watch the first one. I cannot promise I will watch anything after that, but the first card, I want to see how this is presented.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to watch the first show. I don't know if there will be anything more, but maybe in January when the show debuts, maybe it will be the first time that myself, Eric, and Brandon from New Jersey do a show together. Maybe that should be the occasion. I think there's only 2 people I would love to chat about Power Slap with, because this thing is going to be just a circus and then some. That was quite the press conference on Friday.
I was not one of the 13 people who watched it, so I'll take your word for it.
Do not slander Power Slap. It was 61 people in that YouTube channel when I logged in at Friday afternoon. So, you know, just tons of interest in this latest venture. A lot more interest in this next fight that we're going to talk about. Dustin Poirier and Michael Chandler, a fight that everyone expected to be incredible. It was that and then some. The fight of the night. I don't know what we can say about this fight, but we will do our best here. The first round kicks off with Chandler throwing a lot of kicks. He's very aggressive coming out, and then is connecting with the right hand and putting Poirier against the fence. Chandler is having a lot of success. They bump heads. At least that was Joe Rogan's interpretation. And then Chandler lands some big bombs on Poirier, who goes down. And then Michael Chandler delivers a German suplex onto Dustin Poirier. Clearly a nod to the late Antonio Inoki and what he took from Big Van Vader, I think, clearly.
I'm not surprised that Chandler's a huge Inoki fan. You could really see the influence throughout his fights.
So they each then connect with some big strikes. Chandler delivers a knee, Chandler goes down to a knee from the shot, and then Poirier just comes on strong in the final 30 seconds and nearly finishes Chandler. And I thought Poirier did enough here at the end to take the round, but Chandler had Poirier in some extreme problems midway through this round. But by the end of it, Michael Chandler looks like a shovel had been taken to his face for 5 minutes, and he was auditioning for Home Alone or something.
Yeah, despite everything Chandler did throughout the round, I think everyone, including all 3 judges, were in agreement that this was Poirier's round. He almost had Chandler out of there at the end of the round, and if there was a few more seconds, he probably would have.
This to me will probably be on the short list too of round of the year. I thought this first round was just unbelievable. I was just like, I just couldn't fathom how these two would be going another 10 minutes at this rate. And it wasn't quite at this level for the next two rounds, but I mean, this first round, it just had everything. It went back and forth. You had Chandler, I think, surprising people with just how much he connected on Poirier, and then the comeback at the end of this round. It was an incredible 5 minutes.
At this point, I think that's just what you have to expect from a Michael Chandler first round. Complete insanity. It doesn't even matter who his opponent is. It could be Poirier, Gaethje, Oliveira, even Tony Ferguson. You're just going to get a insane roller coaster of an opening round.
The second round, Chandler lifts Poirier up, slams him down, but Poirier is pretty active off his back. He used his elbow to cut open Chandler, and Chandler just leaked on top of him like a faucet here. And Chandler gets the back, goes for a choke. He's got the hooks in, but then ends up in Poirier's guard and is landing strikes, including many to the back of the head, which prompted Forrest Griffin to tweet, "If you're not going to enforce the strikes to the back of the head, then get rid of the rule." Chandler was just like, it's only a rule if it's enforced, because he's going to just take it as a mere suggestion. He was battering this dude in the back of the head.
Oh, Michael Chandler was right in that case, because I can tell you, I've seen a trillion strikes to the back of the head throughout these years of watching MMA, and I can recall maybe 2 times in which it's been called as a foul. It's one of those rules that are never enforced, so you might as well just go for it.
So it's even on my card going into round 3, and the third begins with Chandler again lifting him up and going to the slam, but then tries to go to the back, loses it, and it's Poirier that ends up getting Chandler's back immediately, cinches on a body triangle, and from there, he's able to get a rear naked choke, and it is in tight, submitting Chandler at 2 minutes of the third round, and Dustin Poirier is your winner. Just a hell of a fight that these two had, and they were coming in with unreal expectations. They were met and then some in this fight.
Yep, just like at MSG last year when Michael Chandler faced Justin Gaethje, the second this one was announced, the expectations were through the roof. A fight of the year candidate was expected, and somehow these guys went in there and delivered. I mean, the first round, yes, it was one of the round of the year contenders, and while the second and third round were more grappling heavy, just the roller coaster of Chandler finding all this success with his wrestling and trying to go back to it in the third round, only for Poirier to take his back and choke him out, was some spectacular stuff. A hell of a performance from both men, really, and another impressive win on the resume of Dustin Poirier, who has become one of the greatest fighters of this era.
It really puts Dustin Poirier in a unique position where I think he is just on that cusp of, this guy fighting for another title in his career. I think is very viable at this point. It's like, what can you see as like Dustin Poirier? What's your follow up to this?
After the fight in his post-fight press conference, I believe he suggested Beneil Dariush, and if that's the fight he wants, then go for it. Sounds like a fun matchup to me. And beating Beneil Dariush, who's won how many ever fights in a row, that might be enough to give him another title shot. Listen, I don't favor Dustin Poirier's chances against Islam Makhachev, but his goal is to become the undisputed lightweight champion, and you're going to have to knock off a great fighter to do that. So go for it.
Well, maybe it'll be Dustin Poirier and Alexander Volkanovski. Are you writing off Volk already, Eric?
I actually just completely forgot about that.
Come on, we have a champion versus champion announcement in February.
Oh, I still don't know who I'm favoring in that one, to be honest. That is a really interesting fight.
Yeah, this was an incredible fight. I don't want to be like a downer here, but watching this fight right after the fight we're about to talk about with Frankie Edgar, to me, it's a window into the future. I think for a lot of these guys, this is not a sport that ends on a high note most times. And I watch these guys. It's like their day will come. Like there is a check due at the end of fights like this. And I mean, these guys have just taken an incredible amount of damage in their careers, and they're still hot. They're still operating at a very high level. But I mean, sometimes it's overnight, but it is inevitable that it will happen, that you just do not leave these fights without, a toll being paid at some point. And, throw Justin Gaethje into the mix too. Like those three, they have an unbelievable catalog of fights that they have put together over the last number of years. But you certainly just look no further than Frankie Edgar. Like there's a toll for those fights.
I mean, with Michael Chandler, he's always had a bit of a reputation as a guy who feels like a disrespectful term, but he's been referred to as a bit of a glass cannon throughout his career, in the sense that he could put anybody out, but he's also crumbled many times after getting hit by hard shots. With Dustin Poirier, he is a very resilient fighter, and he's just been in so many of these wild fights since his UFC tenure started. I mean, going like as far back to that fight with the Korean Zombie so many years ago at featherweight.
That was 10 years ago, man. That was 10 years ago that fight took place.
And I mean, look at the Korean Zombie now. You can see that he is at that stage of his career in which he's deteriorating. And I don't know how much longer Dustin Poirier can keep this type of thing up. He's still fighting at a tremendously high level. He's in fantastic shape, but you definitely worry for these guys a bit.
We also had Dustin Poirier was very upset after the fight and brought up to Joe Rogan that Chandler fishhooked him, which is quite the claim to make. But man, this production team, they pulled up the clip. Some pretty compelling evidence. I mean, that's pretty much what we saw here. Clear. I mean, there was not much doubt here. Chandler is on his back and then puts his fingers into the mouth to like raise the neck to go for the choke. And I mean, Chandler seems like a guy that it's just like, hey, if no one's going to call it, I'm going to push every limit possible. But this was, I would love to hear Chandler's defense here, but the video evidence certainly did not sway anyone on Chandler's defense here.
Oh, the audio picked up some gold throughout this fight. Not only did it catch Dustin kind of giving Chandler some hell about the fouls, it also, after the fight, before the decision was announced, he goes up to Michael Chandler and he out Michael Chandler by delivering this inspirational speech about fear, and the only time you can overcome fear is by being brave. Chandler's just this like epic clash, and it's like ill-timed, but at the same time, if anybody's going to just love that, it'd be Michael Chandler, who gives out these motivational speeches like 5 times a day.
Dude, this sport doesn't deserve Dustin Poirier. He's at a higher level as like a class human being than this sport deserves. Have you tried his hot sauce?
Oh yeah, I love his hot sauce.
His hot sauce is like, it's not some like just gimmick of like, it's actually pretty good hot sauce.
Yeah, no, it's good stuff. It's not like it's not the type that's gonna scorch your mouth or anything. It's actually usable with foods and all that. I get it pretty regularly, to be honest.
And they don't pay us a dime to say that either. So there you go. It's just an honest appraisal. Though. All right, let's get to what was probably the saddest fight for everybody on this fight. You know, I made the mistake, Eric. I was doing some work yesterday, so I figured I threw on some Frankie Edgar fights. I watched the second and third Gray Maynard fights. I watched the Tyson Griffin fight. And then I went into that was not the palate cleanser for this fight to get ready by watching some of those wars. Although, going to my last point, it was informative to watch these fights, and then this is the end. It does kind of all connect. Frankie Edgar, 41 years of age, fighting at bantamweight. Those are not often combinations you hear too much. This is a very much a speed division, and with Frankie Edgar, he has had some nasty losses of late. For me, the Corey Sandhagen knockout was just, okay, let's have a sit down at this point. That was just a frightening knockout. He came back, fought Marlon Vera, knockout loss to him, and now his third knockout in a row. You could just see like Gutierrez, just his footwork, his timing, like he was just advanced beyond Edgar here. 10 years younger. There's a spinning back fist that lands that Edgar absorbs, but then as Gutierrez is timing, sets him up, and there's this huge knee down the middle, and dude, Edgar just coffin drops here. This was just a brutal knockout. 201 of the first round. Gutierrez is your winner. Listen, that is how the sport is going to go for most of these guys. It is not a fairy tale ending at the end of these careers. And this was just sad. I mean, you had his family in the front row that they showed just before this. This was, I mean, if you were a Frankie Edgar fan, this was certainly your low moment of the night, but that is the reality of this sport and fighting at this age against this level of competition.
Yeah, this was rough to watch. I mean, all the credit to Chris Gutierrez, who looked phenomenal here. He was just so much faster, so much more explosive than Frankie, timed his shots and got the quick knockout, as I think most people expected. So a big win for him against his highest ranked opponent to date, a big name on a big stage. But I think most of the attention of here is, of course, on Frankie Edgar, his retirement, and quite a brutal loss to go out on. And it's tough, especially to see a guy like Frankie Edgar, who's been at the top of the sport for so long, looking like a very low-level fighter too, as well. I mean, just compare this to a similar case with Dominick Cruz getting knocked out by Marlon Vera not so long ago. You watch that fight and you can see, even though the durability and the speed aren't quite there for Dominick anymore, he's still a very high-level fighter. He can still keep up with some very top-level talent. That's not the case with Frankie Edgar. And yeah, this was really sad to watch. He's lost almost all of his last few fights. That his only win coming against Pedro Munoz, who's a similarly 38-year-old fighter. Many thought he lost that one as well. It was a rough stretch to end his career.
In some ways, it's like the 180, because I remember being at UFC 175, that international fight week in 2014. And the night after was Frankie Edgar, BJ Penn, the third fight that absolutely did not need to happen. And it was the opposite. It was watching BJ Penn in this role where he just had no business at this point. And that was in 2014. And it was being in the media room afterwards. Like, it felt like a funeral afterwards, because it was just BJ Penn, where it's like, okay, the guy is very much human, and this game has passed him by. And that's sort of, that's kind of how these careers go. It's about knowing when to get in and knowing when to get out. And sometimes it's very tough on the back end of that equation.
I mean, once upon a time, Frankie Edgar was a fighter famed for his resiliency and durability, perhaps above any other fighter in the sport. This was a guy who seemingly could get hit by anything, dropped by anything even, and he'd always pick himself up, he'd always recover, and he'd usually win. I mean, consider this guy fighting at bantamweight at this stage of his career, and he looked undersized against every opponent he was in there with at bantamweight. This guy was the lightweight champion of the world of multiple defenses. He was always someone who overcame the odds. He felt like an underdog, and even in every fight, even when he won. And eventually, yeah, his genetic talents, they fail as you get older. That durability fades when you have 8 hours of octagon time on your record. It's a sad part of the sport, but it's one of the realities of the sport that I think we're all aware of. There aren't many people who are going to beat that clock for as long as the likes of Jose Aldo did.
It was wild, Eric. Like, watching him in that first fight in the UFC with Tyson Griffin. Like, if you remember Tyson Griffin, who was like a serious guy, and just the size discrepancy, it was like crazy. That here's Frankie, who wasn't cutting any weight to make 155. But at that time, like, there were no lower weight classes in 07 in the UFC. And he's fighting Tyson Griffin. And this guy became a champion at 155. I think he has a very celebrated career. I mean, you will not find anyone with anything bad to say about Frankie Edgar. What are the fights that come to mind for you? Is he going to most be remembered for the Gray Maynard fights, the BJ Penn ones? What comes to mind instantly for you?
Whenever I think of Frankie Edgar's career, I kind of think of it in two separate stages. You have his successes at lightweight, which mostly revolve around his championship reign, of course. His wins over BJ Penn, specifically the second one, which was a bit more decisive than the first. And we all try to forget about the third one. And of course, the second and third Great Maynard fights, which were just legendary bouts. If any of you haven't seen either of those fights, go watch them, because you can make the case that they're the two greatest lightweight fights of all time. The other stage of his career was perhaps even a bit lengthier, and that's the 6 years he spent in the featherweight division. He was pretty much the top contender at featherweight from when he moved down after losing his title until he left the division after a rough loss to the Korean Zombie and a loss against the then champion Max Holloway. And that was just sort of a case of being in the division at the same time as a couple generational talents. When we're talking about Jose Aldo Jr. and Max Holloway, guys he just couldn't quite keep up with. But his run at featherweight was remarkable too. This included wins over Chad Mendes, over Charles Oliveira. I mean, he had a lot of success even after the end of his title run.
Yeah, how good does that Charles Oliveira win look in hindsight? And here's a guy like, not even stopped till it was like the Brian Ortega fight. Like that was only a few years ago that this guy was actually getting stopped in fights. So, I mean, just to look at these recent fights, like that kind of tells the story. Like he had these wars, but it's really tough once you're pressing, into your 40s in this division of, it's even a Chris Gutierrez who is unranked. There's just killers in this division. So, not a happy ending for Frankie Edgar's career, but a tremendous career that he had, like a Hall of Fame career when you look at what he did, and at a time when this company was not even geared towards his natural weight class at the time, and becoming a champion in a division that he really did not even belong in. That to me is such a remarkable feat that will stand up for a long time. Dan Hooker and Claudio Puelles in the opener on the pay-per-view. Dan Hooker very much in need of a win here. Puelles very much in need of an Imanari rule, which was he had some success in the first round and then just went to this over and over and over again. He did have Hooker's leg at one point, but Hooker was in a safe position, got out of danger, and gets out of it, ends the round on his feet. And then in the second, like this crowd, they want none of Puelles just constantly scooting to his back and like wanted no part of the stand up with Hooker, and Hooker's just getting frustrated, and these Imanari rolls, the crowd is just booing it. Hooker then lands a teep kick to the body, and Puelles is very much hurt from this, and then lands a second one. Puelles goes down, and the fight gets waved off at 4:06 of the second round. This was just wild. Puelles, you could certainly give the first round to him, and I don't think he even landed a shot in the first round. It was just all the threat with the heel hook, but this was quite the fight to start things off with. I didn't know what to make of this.
No, this was a really weird fight. This was like a Ryan Hall fight on steroids.
Yeah.
It was so strange. I mean, he did almost get Dan Hooker in a spot of trouble in the first round, but that was all of his success really, and he just kept going for it to no avail. And Hooker just picked apart with a lot of body work, and you could see that Claudio's his gas tank had depleted very quickly, and I mean, this was a weird fight to watch.
And this turned out to be at least one of the wins for City Kickboxing on a night where they went 2-2, because on the prelims, Brad Riddell, representing City Kickboxing, fell to Renato Moicano, who I don't know if any of us had on the short list of stars to come out of this particular fight card, but Moicano, my God, this guy. So he's 3-2 since he moved to lightweight. He submitted Alexander Hernandez back in February, and then he came back 3 weeks later and fought RDA at a catchweight, and like just on the 3 weeks notice, and lost by decision to him. So has been very active already in 2022, fighting here at 155 pounds. And Moicano is landing with his jab, lands with a knee. And dude, this guy just was so accurate with his strikes. He had cut Riddell under the eye and then gets the takedown, goes to the back of Riddell and secures the rear naked choke. And Riddell just, I mean, this forced Daniel Cormier to bring out the telestrator. This is the point he wanted to emphasize, was how little Riddell was fighting this choke, pointing out all of the ways his hands could have been used, and he chose none of those options. Submitted at 3:20 of the first round, and then the most incredible speech ever by Moicano. This put Nate Diaz to shame. This is probably going to be the defining moment of Renato Moicano's UFC career, with the speech. It was pretty much all censored if you were watching at home, but this place was losing it. Joe Rogan was dying. This guy was just something else. It was unbelievable. Spoke in the third person. He wants money. He's disrespected over the rankings. I think there was something about eating steaks in Brazil. I mean, this just covered the gamut of life for Renato Moicano. He let it all out here.
His energy was at a 2,000 out of 10 here. He was off the charts. He was swearing every second word, so they censored like 75% of his speech, and that just added to it, really.
You have to watch even the censored version. It's just like the idea that a person was trying to capture all these like F-bombs it was amazing theater to watch, of imagining the poor guy in the truck that was in charge of this, as this is airing on, I think it was like ESPN News or something in the US. Like, this is not even on the pay-per-view. This is on live television.
and they would cut back to him when they're not censored, and then he's like talking in the third person. Moicano doesn't give a shit. It was the most entertaining speech I have heard in years. It was so great. He's an entertaining fighter, so this just goes along with it. Fantastic stuff.
It wasn't like this win was like the performance of the night, but in terms of a guy that upped his star power with all of this like from start to finish, speech included. I mean, the gains that this guy made, like this is part of the game of like trying to separate yourself from the pack of just being an entertaining personality. That's a great fighter. Moicano is, he's always been like a dominant guy at featherweight, and moving up to lightweight, he's had success. But I think this is going to do wonders for him and just his profile.
He's really been showcasing his personality a bit more since moving up to lightweight. I mean, his last post-fight interview was pretty good as well. Not as good as this, not on this level, but he showcased some of that charisma. And the one that always comes to mind, and I forget his opponent right now, but it might have been his first fight up at lightweights, but it was a really heated bout, and Moicano submits him quickly, and then Moicano's like pissed. He's angry after the stoppage, and we can't tell why. And then the mics, they see him go up to his opponent, and he says, "Man, I'm so angry. I want the fight longer." And the other guy says, "Well, you shouldn't have submitted me then." Tremendous moment.
This was great. They should put the whole uncensored thing up on YouTube or something like this.
They have. You can check it out on the UFC post-fight or UFC YouTube page, and I recommend it 100% because this was the highlight of this entire show.
In light heavyweight action, Ryan Spann knocked out Dominick Reyes in a minute 20. Both were throwing heavy at the start, and it's Spann just getting the better of the exchange, knocks Reyes out cold with a left hand, and then just for good measure, one more shot on the ground as if that was necessary. So Spann was 12th in his ranking. Reyes was 7th, but this is now his 4th consecutive loss, 3rd straight stoppage. And it just looks, Eric, like that John Jones fight was a crossroads of his career. He had all the injuries coming out of that. I'm confusing him with Thiago, but nonetheless, had such a close fight with John Jones, and since then he's just cratered in this division, and I just don't know what is next for Dominick Reyes.
It's so weird to speak about the fighter like Dominick Reyes, who felt like he was just climbing to contention to the top of the ladder less than 2 years ago. And at this point, it feels like we should be talking about him in the same way we were talking about Frankie Edgar. He has been brutally knocked out in 3 straight fights. His durability is in serious question right now. I don't want to say, okay, he's been knocked out 3 times, he should go retire, but it's really concerning just how far he's fallen so quickly and in brutal fashion.
And he's 32.
Yeah, I don't know what to even make of the age. It's not like he's that old in terms of fight years, but I don't know what's next for him at all at this point. It feels like he is so far removed from where we thought he would be.
And Ryan Spann said, well, he was asked, what's been the difference? What's led to all this success? He's like, I train now. He said, before I had never trained longer than 3 weeks for a fight. So now he's fallen into this trap of doing fight camps, Eric. So it's proven to be a good model.
Who would have guessed, really? I mean, that's a really interesting technique that he's trying out here. I think more fighters can learn from Ryan Spann.
This guy had 27 fights coming into this, okay? And he said now he started fight camps. So that's quite something to figure out as you're approaching your 30th fight. So this is a great win for Ryan Spann. The light heavyweight division, it's not always the deepest. So if you can get on a bit of a run, you can elevate yourself pretty quickly in this division. Molly McCann against Erin Blanchfield. As much attention is on Molly McCann, she was a huge underdog in this fight. And Blanchfield, only 23 years of age, she's 3-0 in the UFC, coming off a submission against JJ Aldrich back in June. And Blanchfield gets the takedown into side control, and she uses a crucifix, and she landed I lost count after about like 3,000 shots that she landed on Molly McCann, who could not get out of this crucifix. And then Blanchfield figures, well, I'm not getting a stoppage here. So then she moves on to the Kimura, nearly snatches McCann's arm off of her body, then goes back, reapplies the Kimura, and finally Molly McCann taps. Cormier stated on the broadcast that the strikes in this fight for the 3 minutes and 37 seconds it lasted, 111-6. And my question was, where did the 6 come from Molly McCann? I didn't even count that high. Big win for Erin Blanchfield. And she is, she makes you seem old, Eric. I mean, she was born in May of 1999. And God, this flyweight division, it needs some contenders, and I wouldn't say Blanchfield should be looking at a title fight yet, but certainly looked great here against a Molly McCann. And I would say someone that everyone should definitely keep their eyes on, because she looked great here, and hopefully they slowly progress her. But this could be somebody that in a year or two is, thrust right up into the top of the division.
Yeah, I mean, I think this was a matchup that kind of raised some eyebrows when it was announced. It felt like the UFC was getting behind Molly McCann a bit with her recent surge in popularity, and I don't think this was a fight that anybody thought she stood much of a chance. And no disrespect to Molly McCann, but Erin Blanchfield is for real, and the fight played out exactly as you would expect it to. She's 3-0 now in UFC, I believe. She's looked very impressive throughout these 3 fights, and she's looking at a top 10 opponent next, I'd imagine.
4-0 in the UFC
4-0
after this win. And I believe I didn't see the press conference that she did afterwards, but I believe that she was asked about Valentina Shevchenko and said, when I fight her, I know I can beat her. So, I mean, she's not lacking any confidence. I would not want to throw her to Shevchenko yet. Let's not get ahead of ourselves here. But this kind of a division, this is the division where you get thrown into the deep end pretty quick if you put together some wins and have any kind of following behind you, because God, there's nobody for Valentina Shevchenko.
No, I mean, the only thing people are even considering right now is the Talia Santos rematch, I suppose, after the split decision in their last bout. Maybe Manon Fiorot, but she didn't seem that interested in a Valentina Shevchenko fight. So there definitely aren't a lot of options for Valentina outside of a third fight with Amanda Nunes, I suppose.
Andre Petroski and Wellington Turman, one of the few fights that went the distance in this. It was a very close first round. I ended up scoring it for Turman. How did you have the first round? Because I was going like back and forth, and then I saw like everyone like outraged when they saw Petroski get the 30-27s here. But I thought this round was close enough. I don't think it's a crime if you went with Petroski here. But how did you have it?
I scored the first round 10-9 for Petroski.
Yeah. So the second here, Turman is trying for a guillotine. He loses it. This is where Petroski started to use some of his grappling. He gets a mount. But then on his own, he decides to go to half guard instead. He's like 4 for 7 on his takedowns by this point, landed some big elbows at the end. And then in the third, it was a completely one-sided round for Petroski. He got another mount, let go of a choke, and he just controlled Turman, slammed him down to the mat. So I had Petroski 29-28. The judges had it 30-27 twice and 29-28. And so Petroski is now 4-0 in the UFC, and he threw out the 2 names at the top of anyone's list, Bo Nickel, okay, or Gerald Meerschaert, one or the other. That's who he wants, Eric. An interesting pairing of like either one, Bo Nickel or Gerald Meerschaert.
When you think about unranked grapplers in the middleweight division, to be fair, those might be the top 2 grapplers you could name. Completely different styles, of course, but I can see where he's going. He's on a quest to prove that he is the best grappler in this division. So, yeah, go for the 2 guys who could also take claim to that title who aren't in title contention. So I'm guessing that's his intention. And I'm thinking that Meerschaert's probably a more likely next bout for him than Bo Nickel, who's fighting in December, I believe.
Did he get a new opponent for that? What happened with that? There was his opponent. Did he fall out of that fight, or did his opponent? I can't even remember now.
I don't know either way. I don't even remember.
He was announced for that card. Something might have happened to that fight, but we can check. Matt Frivola and Ottman Azatar. So Ottman Azatar, they explained, had been let go by the UFC when he had been accused of letting somebody into their bubble on Fight Island. And then I guess UFC did a reverse course correction and then brought Azatar back. So he has not fought in 2 years. September of 2020 was his last fight, and then he was supposed to fight Matt Frevola when this incident took place. So now, all these years later, they finally get to the fight, and Azatar swings, misses. He gets clipped with a right hand, and he goes down from a big left and gets finished with 2 more on the ground as Matt Frevola gets the knockout in 2.5 minutes of the first round. And afterwards, he gets on the mic and he tries to start a chant for himself. And I was stunned that this did not fall flat. There were people that did shout his nickname back at him. It might have only been like 50 people, but at least it came back, because sometimes we hear these and it's silence, and it's always like a cringy moment. But he got some support here with the request of the crowd to chant his nickname.
Yeah, it wasn't a fear the consequences or here we go evil moment. So the crowd was supportive of Matt Frevola after his big knockout here.
Karolina Kowalkiewicz, who challenged for Joanna Jędrzejczyk's title on the very first Madison Square Garden card. Over the last couple of years, she had lost 5 in a row. Not often you get that kind of leniency. But then in her last fight in June, submitted Felice Herrig. She was taking on Silvana Gomez Juarez, which was the most difficult name for Daniel Cormier over the course of these 3 rounds. He constantly was calling her Silvana Juarez Gomez and was calling himself out, saying, I don't know why I keep saying it backwards. It's Gomez Juarez. And then he would go back to Juarez Gomez. And to be quite honest, if he didn't call it out, I don't think anyone would have noticed this, but he made it. I could not pay attention to it after he called it out. But dude, of some of the names like on this card, you would think he would struggle with, but this was the challenging one that nearly broke the man.
His internal struggle throughout this fight was very entertaining because he couldn't get it.
So Kowalkiewicz got 2 takedowns in the round, which they brought up. These 2 takedowns have equaled the amount of takedowns Kowalkiewicz has had in her previous 13 fights in the UFC. So never a bad time to learn wrestling at the age of 37.
Not at all. It's something that she was in desperate need of and responsible for that lengthy losing streak.
Gomez Juarez had a better round in the second, landing several right hands. Close round. I had it even going into the third, and then Kowalkiewicz is using her jabs, lots of pressure here, and then gets her down, but can't take the back, and that's how the round ends. So we think, okay, score this fight. Let's just read out the cards. But the New York State Athletic Commission had a near meltdown here on the early prelims, because we see a commission member enter and he is furiously going over these cards and correcting them as time stood still. And there was these problems with the cards. And finally, after a long delay, they concluded that Karolina Kowalkiewicz won by unanimous decision 29-28, which was the scorecard I had. And I would just love to know what the hell was going on here, because this was just a mess on the commission's part.
Yeah, this was so weird. I don't think I've ever seen a scorecard just ripped out of Bruce Buffer's hands and edited in the cage in clear view of the camera before. This was one of the stranger things I can recall. But I don't know what the problem was either. I didn't look into it after the bout. These cards move at a fast pace sometimes, but really strange stuff. I'm sure it's just an error and like someone flipped or the math was wrong or something, but quite the moment.
Do you forecast Karolina Kowalkiewicz meeting a Zhang Weili down the road?
I do not think that's in her future. I mean, she has a lot of miles on her at this point. She has improved her wrestling greatly, as evidenced in her last 2 fights, but I don't know. I think her days of being a top contender in the division are behind her at this point.
Michael Trezano, who missed weight by 1.5 pounds on Friday, took on Seung-woo Choi in a featherweight fight. This one got the very rare double knockdown, Eric. Both men landing left hooks in the first 30 seconds and go down. And I think it was Joe Rogan who said, you don't see that too often. I mean, you see it sometimes in some online videos, but you don't see it at this level. This was one that should go into the opening highlight package for every card.
Oh, definitely. Nothing in all of MMA is better than a double knockdown, except for that time the Matt Mitrione knocked out Fedor after a double knockdown. We all just pretend that didn't happen. But this was the perfect way to start this fight. And let's say this may have been as great as Michael Chandler and Dustin Poirier was. This fight might have been even crazier for the short time it lasted.
This was it didn't last as long as Chandler and Poirier, but for the time they had, this was a hell of a round that they had. Trezano drops him and he's on top with hammer fist, but Choi gets back to his feet, and now it's Choi that rocks him with a left, and he just throws caution to the wind here. He is throwing everything at Trezano, and with that, Trezano connects with a left hook that drops Choi, and he lands 4 shots on top and ends it by knockout at 4:51 of the first round. And they stated afterwards it was the last fight on his UFC contract, and he had lost his previous 2 fights. So this was, and missed weight. So you had John Anik stating that, he might be up for a bonus after that performance, and then realized that he had missed weight. So not quite. So Michael Trezano, the message here, always make weight. But yeah, this was a super exciting fight for the 4:51 it lasted.
Yeah, this was wild. There's like 5 knockdowns in a minute here. Both guys were badly hurt at points. It was a great win for Trezano, too, who was in desperate need of something like this, given his contract situation and recent bouts. A pretty tough loss for Choi, who has a very rough UFC record at this point, and he's taken a lot of damage, like a remarkable amount of damage in his last few fights. So perhaps a drop in level of competition would be beneficial for him.
And then the remaining 2 fights, we had a Montel Jackson defeating Julio Arce by unanimous decision on scores of 30-27 twice, 29-28. Close first round. And then once Jackson got his hands going, like you could certainly see like his effectiveness with his jab, stacked Arce, who was very active off of his back. But it was Jackson who, I mean, in the stand-up, just the superior striker here, to me, winning the last 2 rounds for sure. And then it opened with Carlos Ulberg knocking out Nikolay Negumereanu in 3 minutes and 44 seconds of the first round, getting City Kickboxing off to a strong start. And Ulberg has now won 3 straight. This was a very nice win for Ulberg. Any thoughts on these 2 fights here, Eric?
For Ulberg, I thought this was his best performance in UFC to date. I remember when he made his UFC debut, I didn't think much of him at all. I thought it was a fairly bad performance. This, he looks like a much improved fighter over a very short period of time, and in a division like light heavyweight, that means a lot. I can see him going a lot further than I would have projected him after his first fight in the promotion. As far as Arce versus Jackson, I thought this was far and away the worst fight on the entire card. I mean, there was very little activity. It was a chore to get through, so I don't really have much to say other than Jackson clearly won.
Yes, there's always going to be one of them in a 14 fight marathon, but overall, like, this was an excellent show. I thought the prelims were fantastic, and then you got that main card. This card just had everything. I think it'll be a strong candidate for card of the year. You might get fight of the year out of this from some. I think round of the year would be up for Chandler and Poirier's first. And like 2 significant, well, 1 significant title change and 1 that I think maybe people were already telegraphing ahead of that. Like, dude, I literally saw tweets beforehand of like, before the fight started, people saying, I am going to congratulate Zhang Weili now on becoming the new strawweight champion, just to get it out first. I mean, it was just like the amount of writing off of Carla Esparza. I mean, I just could not believe it. But that was UFC 281. Tremendous show. And the fight of the night, obviously going to Chandler and Poirier, and then Zhang Weili and Alex Pereira getting the performance of the night bonuses. A very jovial Dana White afterwards. Half an hour he did. And this was at, God, this card ended at like 1 a.m, and then the press conference happened afterwards. So this was a very, very late night. And yeah, that was it. Any closing thoughts on UFC 281, Eric?
Not really. This was a tremendous card. 11 finishes in 14 fights. You got 2 title changes. You got some absolutely brutal knockouts, and the final fight of Frankie Edgar. As depressing as the bout may have been, that's another really notable moment. We'll see if this is indeed his final fight. I truly hope it is.
Oh, I really hope it is. Yeah. So before we look at the cards coming up, we do have a super chat from the one and only Brandon from New Jersey. Eric, should Pereira go up to lightweight, I think he means light heavyweight, he would totally own that weight class. See you Saturday. Can't wait. What are you talking about on Saturday? Well, this Saturday at QXT's nightclub in Newark, New Jersey. It's the Post Wrestling 5-year anniversary show, minutes away from AEW Full Gear. We hope to see you all there. postwrestling.com/live. I know Brandon wanted to fit all of that in there, but he was, I guess, strung for time.
Yeah, I won't be seeing you there on Saturday, Brandon. And I also think Alex Pereira will probably die if he tries to cut to 155 pounds.
That would not be a successful weight cut. But I guess we can update people that because myself, Neil, Andrew Thompson are all going to be in Newark next weekend. What are we going to do for AEW Full Gear? We have passed on the baton to the great Eric Marcotte, who will be covering AEW on the site next Saturday. Is this confirmed, Eric?
It is confirmed. Will this be a complete disaster? We will find out.
We will find out. Maybe there will be some more press conference fun next weekend. We will see. But Eric doing the MVP work next weekend on the site. Meanwhile, for the UFC, so next weekend they're back with Derek Lewis and Sergey Spivak at the Apex. Actually, they're off the following weekend, and then December 3rd, it's Stephen Thompson against Kevin Holland in the main event, and they are going on the road for that fight night to Orlando, Florida. And the next time we will be here is the weekend of UFC 282, which is headlined by another contender for Fight of the Year. It will be a rematch between Yuri Prochazka and Glover Teixeira for the light heavyweight championship. The rest of the main card has Magomed Ankalaev against Jan Blachowicz, Paddy Pimblett versus Jared Gordon, Robbie Lawler against Santiago Ponzinibbio, and Bryce Flat Earth Mitchell taking on Ilya Topuria. What else do we have here? Alexander Gustafsson against Oven St. Preux in 2022.
What?
That is happening. Darren Till is back taking on Dricus Duplessis. Jairzinho Rosenstruck against Chris Dawkins. What else do we have here? Those are the standout fights on the card next month. This was the card that, there had been the rumors of John Jones potentially coming back for this, but that did not pan out. Dana White stating John Jones will fight in 2023. So what do you think about this next pay-per-view offering? Are you hyped for Prochazka Glover number 2?
Their first fight is probably the fight of the year for me at this point. But man, looking through that card, there is a lot of shop ward fighters on this card. I mean, Oven St. Preux versus Alexander Gustafsson in 2022. That might be a really sad fight. I mean, Robbie Lawler, that might be a really sad fight too. Man, I can't say I'm looking forward to this now. It feels like an entire lineup of Frankie Edgar fights after Frankie Edgar fights.
Well, you've got a month to get ready for that one. So that is the day we have got Final Battle, NXT Deadline, and then this UFC card. So that's all happening in the very same day. So that'll be quite the fun weekend, won't it? Yeah, man, I'm just pulling up Robbie Lawler here. He has lost 5 of his last 6. We last saw him against Brian Barberina, where, to be honest, Robbie Lawler did not look terrible in that fight with Brian Barberina. So
no, Robbie's never really went out there and looked terrible. He still does some interesting things. He's fairly durable, even though he got finished in that one. But still, his best days are long, long behind him.
Yeah, when you look at the guys he has had, he's fought these losses: RDA, Ben Askren, which was the fight that was very much debated, Colby Covington, Neil Magny. He had the win against Nick Diaz, which was a very weird fight, and then the Brian Barberina loss. So there you have it. That will be next month's offering from the UFC. But Eric, I want to thank you, number one, for your fantastic report last night on the site that everyone can go check out with Eric's in-depth thoughts about the card, doing this show, and about 10 million changes that I threw your way over the week as we tried our best to workshop this backup plan. And a big thank you to Davey Portman and the BDE here for hosting the UFC 281 post show.
It all worked out in the end.
So Eric, where can people follow you and get all of your thoughts, your in-depth reflections on life? Where's the best place to follow Eric Marcotte?
You can follow me at Eric Marcotte 705 on Twitter. You can go postwrestling.com/Discord and talk to me in the wrestling and MMA channels. I'm very active in there. And all of my written work is on postwrestling.com.
All right. Thanks to everyone for joining us at the new start time here that we had for today only, but we appreciate it. And once again, if you are in the New Jersey area next Saturday, postwrestling.com/live for our 5-year anniversary show. And we hope to see many of you there. That is it for us. Have a wonderful rest of your day. From the BDE, I am John Pollock for Eric Marcotte. Thank you for tuning in to the UFC 281 post show.